Even during the NATO bombing, my neighbors all knew who I was. Nobody ever said an awful thing. My neighbors were going off to the market and bringing us food because my daughter was a baby.
Meet Randall Major. He's an American who first came to Serbia nearly 40 years ago. Here he fell in love with his future wife and decided to stay for life. He taught English at the University of Novi Sad and translated several dozen books from Serbian into English. He shared what life was like for an American living here during Yugoslavia, why he refused to leave the country during the 90s, and why he would rather go to dentist than to Belgrade. Enjoy!
Moj prvi kontakt sa srpskim jezikom se bio sa komšinicom, baba Branka. I od nje sam učio te početne faze. Bez ikakve znanja jezika sam došao u Srbiju. Došao sam u septembru možda, a tu oko Božića, u decembru, idem kod babe Branke i pitam nje, baba Branka, da li imaš čerku? Ona kaže, pa imam čerku. Kažem, dobro, da li mogu da kupim čerku? I ona kaže, molim. Pitam, ponovim, da li mogu da kupim vašu čerku? Ona kaže, Randy, to se ne radi kod nas. Ja kažem, kako ne? U Americi, oko Božića, mi kupimo čerku, pa je koljemo, onda napunimo sa projem i sa kobasicom i onda ispečemo u revni i onda serviramo za ručak. Ona mi gleda i ne zna o čemu ja pričam uopšte. Jedna baba Branka maltene doživjela moždani udar zbog mene. Dođi unutra, sedimo, popimo kafu, ona pozelenila. Ja sam pomešao reći čerka i čurka, što je turkey, znači daughter and turkey. I onda sam ja to pomešao, zato što jako slični su, po meni su bili slični. I tu se te problemi razni bili. Sam u gradu sa devojkom, tada u to vreme, imam 20 i nešto godina, ona se raskida sa momkom, a mi smo zajedno u gradu. A momak nas vidi i misli da smo zajedno i on priđe meni i hoće da se svađa sa mnom, hoće da mi tuče, jel, čovjek. I krene na meni i ja se odbranim, a policija se pojavljuje tu da vidi šta se dešava, koje komešanje tu. A ja kažem policajcu, taj čovjek je htio da mi tuca. I on kaže, molim, taj čovjek htio da mi tuca. A policajac mi gleda. Valjda nije. I onda počinje da priča s njim. I to je razlika između tući, kao udariti nekoga, i tucati. To je znači imati seks. Ja sam rekao, taj čovjek hoće pokušava da mi jebe. Everybody in Novi Sad knows these. Those are the so-called three kula. These are these old buildings built in the Tito era with Tito's engineers. They're solid buildings with thick walls and thick floors, and they're meant for, good human living. This is an old neighborhood, and the people here, they tease about this part of Novi Sad. It is gerontološki centar. So it's old people living here.
How was life in pre-war Yugoslavia? Do you have memories about it?
The Tito era was slowly ending, and they were trying to figure out how to adapt to the market economy, the new thing that was coming from the West. The Berlin Wall fell. The entire East Bloc was trying to adapt to the new way of thinking about things. And things were very dynamic here. There was a while in Yugoslavia when there was a lot of money around. People could make money working normally. You could make, good money translating, teaching English, and so on. I was a kid from Texas. I was very afraid of communism, because I imagine people not being able to talk freely. I imagine people standing in lines to get bread. I imagined all sorts of things. And at the border, I imagined guards with machine guns and German shepherds and barbed wire and, this sort of thing. When my friends invited me to go with them to Yugoslavia, I said no 10 times, 15 times. I said, no, I'm not doing that. One night, we had finished our classes and we were up at the pub. We were out at the bar drinking. My friend Janko, who was from a place called Pivnica here in Vojvodina, around midnight, he stood up and he said, I've got to go home. I'll walk you. He said, no. I got to go home. I'm going to Pivnica. I picked up one of our other friends and I said, listen, he can't drive to Yugoslavia right now. He's drunk. And the guy said, yeah, you're right, but he needs to go because something had happened in his family. Well, let's go. And I went home and got my passport, and we came. We got to the border. I was driving, and I was very tense. I was expecting the dogs and the machine guns and all the... And the Slovene guy at the border walked over to the car, looked at the three of us, looked at my passport and said, okay, go. That was all. And I went, what? What is this? And then we drove to Novi Sad. We got a good night's sleep. And the next day, they took me to the fortress, the Tvrđava, here in Novi Sad. There was a restaurant there. There still is a restaurant there. But in the restaurant, there was a guy playing the tamburica, the tambura. His name was Janika Balaš, a little Romani guy. And he had an orchestra of 7 other guys who were playing this. We had this beautiful meal. They invited their friends, and there was lots of alcohol, of course, you know. And this man playing this beautiful music, and they were singing and all of this, and the people at the table were singing, and the people over in the corner. And it was cheap, and the women were beautiful, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Every time somebody would come from Switzerland to come here, one of these Yugoslavs, I would go with them. And I started getting to know how they lived. And back in the Tito's days, people worked from 6 or 7 in the morning until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and they were done. They didn't work that hard at work. They got paid for it. They had 6 weeks off during the summer, which for me was unheard of as an American because we only have 2 weeks. They had a year for maternity leave, which I believe they still have. This for me was you know, unbelievable. That this was a way of living that was not so focused on work. What you do is who you are. And for them, it wasn't that way. They were who they were. And so maybe that was the biggest difference. They worked to live, and that lived to work, which is what we live, you and I live in today. Maybe that's the biggest difference. That's changed now because now everybody's working just to get by. And what you are now is who they identify you as. You know, you're a programmer. You know, you're a YouTuber. I'm a professor. I'm this. It's your profession that identifies who you are. But that's not who we are. Maybe that was a healthier way. No, in fact, that was a healthier way of looking at human beings.
Do you think this way of being human beings is still in Serbia? Or it's completely
yes,
erased?
To a certain extent. In the older generations, for sure. I'm a boomer. I was born in 1959, so that I'm safely in the range of being a boomer. And so all the people who are my age and a little bit younger, up down to their 50s, I think, still have memories of that old way of life and that old way of thinking about work and that old way of living. And you'll see a lot of that here now. People still very often, they do their jobs because they have to, and then they go home and do something else. I mean, completely different. I think a lot of that has stayed around. The capitalist idea has infected us to a degree, but not as much, I would say. I would have to talk to more young people to find out how they feel about it, but I know that they don't want to live like that.
So these misconceptions, you thought that the country is militarized, that you at the border will be met by armed men with shepherds, etc. Do you think these kind of misconceptions are still in the Western world about Serbia, or the situation has changed?
When I go to the States or when I go to Western Europe, if I say I'm from Serbia, they don't know what I'm talking about. Very often they confuse it with Siberia, or they confuse it with Syria, or they confuse it with some other place. You know, I was in Texas not so long ago, and I said, well, I've got to send something to Serbia. They said, isn't that the place that has the churches, you know, carved into the rock? And I'm going, no, I think that you're talking about, you know, something else. That's Syria or one of those countries over there, and this is Serbia. Oh, you mean the really cold place? And I said, no, that's Siberia, you know, and so on. Most people, I don't think, have that conception, have any sort of conception about it. People, even back then, when I moved here, people would confuse it. They called it like Yugoslavia. For a while, more people identified it because of the bombing, the NATO bombing in 1999-2000, that whole era of the change from Milosevic into the present era. The ones who do know something about it usually have a very sort of positive attitude toward it, like, oh, I've heard that that's a really free-thinking country in the sense of you can live there well if you want to. It's a surprise to them, I think, when they find out, you know, Novi Sad, it's been here for 300 years, you know, 400 years. They're surprised that this place even exists. People walking through, having ice cream in the middle of the day, and they're going, what's going on there? And then they come to see it. I think they're surprised by it, always. To this day, you have that element of surprise, like I was surprised. I enjoy doing photography as well. This is my sister's, but I do my sister and my mother. This is both Alaska. I've got a Nikon. It's West Texas. This is in Mississippi. It's a place where black people get together to listen to music in the evenings. This is in Serbia. This is outside of Sombor.
Pre-90s Yugoslavia, did people feel the war coming?
Yes, they did. I would say as early as 1988, people could feel that something was different. In the Tito era in Yugoslavia, there was not a negation of, but let's say not even a suppression.
Anti-nationalistic politics.
Well, not even, that's what I'm trying to avoid, is the anti-anything. It was just sort of, don't talk about that. Okay, you're a Serb by background or you're a Croat by background, but we don't talk about that. We're all Yugoslavs. And as the 80s progressed, as 88 and 89 came along, they began talking again about what their national backgrounds were. They were finding out that their neighbor is actually by background from Montenegro or by background from somewhere in Croatia. They didn't know this before. Yeah, they could feel it coming. So that sense of national awakening did occur in the late 80s.
Didn't it frighten you?
No.
As a foreigner?
I was fascinated by it. Maybe for somebody living in Belgrade it would be different. But for me, living here in Vojvodina, I always experienced this as like a multicultural, multinational surrounding. Because here I always had students who were Slovak, Hungarian, Ruthenian, even some Czech, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian. They were all together, and so I never experienced it like that. It didn't frighten me because I knew all of them. I knew all of the nationalities, and they were all nice people, and it didn't matter where they came from. So it didn't scare me at all.
I mean, the possibility of war, that there will be uncertainty, there will be hardships.
Sure, but I mean, we were a part of that in the sense of we were living here, and I had to drive my friends to their collection points when they were going off to war. But I was living through that with the people that I lived with. It was not a time for me to pick up and go. These people have been very good to me. They've helped to feed me and take care of me, and they've given me a job, and and I'm working here and I'm living with them. These are my friends. These are the people that I'm communicating with. Because now they're having some trouble, I should pick up and go. That didn't seem right to me. And so we didn't. We stayed here. My son was born in 1993, right in the middle of all of that, with the inflation and everything else. We lived through it. That was a feeling of maybe loyalty. There were times when it was awful, but we made it through. Most people have forgotten the inflation in 93, when I was making 3 Deutschmarks at the faculty, taking my paycheck, which was, 3 trillion dinars, and trying to go to the market to buy a loaf of bread with it, and it was like a big stack of money, this sort of thing. I've still got it got some of it in my office, these old notes and things. I spent the last 60 Deutschmarks that we had in the house. When my son was born, he had a different RH type than my wife. She needed to take a medicine called Rogam so that she could have another baby one day. And so I spent the last 60 Deutschmarks we had at the house to get that for her in case we decided to have children later on. And I remember feeling very, very poor that day and realizing that I needed to do something. And so I began looking for jobs and trying to find translation work and other stuff in order just to make it through. And I remember waiting in line for gasoline when you could only buy 10 liters at a time with a coupon. There were some really rough times here. I should say that too. People have always been very nice to me. There was one occasion a long time ago when somebody told me, you need to leave. You don't belong here. As an American, you should go.
It was in the 90s?
Actually, it was after the 90s. It was in the 2000s. I was at a wedding, and some guy told me this. But even during the NATO bombing, my neighbors all knew who I was. They knew that I lived in their building. They knew that I was from America. Nobody ever said an awful thing. Nobody said an evil word to me. My neighbors were going off to the market and bringing us food because my daughter was a baby. They brought us milk. We always lived together with people, and we were always helping each other, helping our neighbors. They were helping us. My brother-in-law and her parents also helped us as much as... My mother also helped us as much as she could.
So you had this safety net here.
Society itself is a safety net. You build a community wherever you are, and you build that community around you. And if you don't do that, you're in bad shape. One of the modern problems we have is that we're isolated from each other, and we're in front of our screens wherever we are, and we're not building those communities around us. We're losing the sense of community that I need to help my neighbor. I know my neighbors here in the building. And if they needed something, I would certainly go to help them. And if I needed something, I know that they would come to help me. We need to do these things. This is part of being human. That's how it worked back then in the 90s. That's the answer to your question, is we do what humans do, which is to communicate with each other. I've been working on that for 3 or 4 years now. A friend of mine and I started working on it together as a characterization of the Scream. So the main character on the bridge of the Scream is here. You can see the outline. And the character, the dark character, the threatening monster is here in the background. So I just
looks like not threatening at all. It's like white.
Will be. Will be. It's not finished.
Ah, it's not finished.
Yeah. I've been working on it for 4 years. It needs to be finished. He needs to be black. and threatening with some very dark brown here and so on.
NATO bombings. You knew that there will be bombings,
Yes.
but you decided to stay in the country. Why?
It was in October of 1998. My wife and I, she was pregnant, and we were out walking. We went for a walk on the quay here by the Danube, and I told her, I said, "Listen, as far as I can tell, NATO is going to bomb us." And she said, "No, they're not." And I said, "They're going to bomb us." And she said, "No, they're not." And I said, "I'm pretty sure it's looking more and more like they're going to bomb us." She said, "No, they're not." And I said, "Okay." I said, "I think we should." She was 2 months pregnant, 3 months pregnant, and I said, "If we're going to go, now's the time. Before January, we need to go, because you shouldn't be pregnant and flying on a plane." And she said, "I don't think it's going to happen. I think you're wrong. We've always been an ally with the NATO countries, with America especially, First World War, Second World War. This is not going to happen." Which was, I believe, very widespread. It was a widespread understanding of most people in Serbia at that time, was that this is our old ally. They're not going to do this. They're going to threaten us, but they're not going to do that. They would never do that. In any case, but we made a decision then that we would stay, and I prepared for it. I mean, I knew that it was going to happen, and I prepared for it. I got a transistor radio and flashlights and water purification tablets, and got everything else ready. And by the time it was really getting serious, in February, March, my daughter was born 2 days before the bombing. So she came home from the hospital on the day they started bombing. They came home, my wife and my daughter. You can't cross the border with a baby, with an undocumented baby, right? That would be trafficking. They wouldn't let you cross. The embassy was closed. You know, we could probably get, we tried to get a passport for her, but she was just a baby, and some time has to pass, and so on and so forth. By the time all of the legal problems had finished up, the 80 days had passed. So we were here the whole time.
You were living in this apartment?
No. We were living there on the Liman, one of the other Limans, down toward, closer to the bridges.
So you saw when it happened, when they...
We had some very dramatic moments in our life together. The two biggest explosions were, for us, three, were the TV station in Kamenica. It's right across the Danube from us. And they hit it with a 500 to 1,000 pound bunker buster. I was lying on the bed with my son, trying to get him to go to sleep. And when the bomb hit, it literally threw us out of bed onto the floor as the building shook. Then the train bridge. They had to put so much explosive into the bridge that when they blew it up, they finally did blow it up. Debris came all the way from where that is now, the train station, the train bridge, to the Faculty of Philosophy, which is way over here on the Liman. You know, you could find chunks of it all over the place. It was crazy. It was so loud. It broke the windows also at the faculty. And also when they bombed the tunnels for the Liberty Bridge. It was very, very dramatic. My daughter was a baby. We talked to the pediatrician. Should we be going to the bomb shelters? And he said, "Listen, the chances of them hitting your apartment building are very small. The chances of her getting pneumonia in the bomb shelter is very high. If I were you, I would just stay in your apartment with her." So we did. So we would see the anti-aircraft fire, you know, and the airplanes flying over and the bombs falling. And it was crazy.
How was everyday life under bombings?
You get up in the morning, you see what's going on. Is there water? Is there electricity? You try to figure out a way to make lunch. Or when they had electricity, we would cook something quickly and then put it in a thermos. In the afternoon, go out and, you know, try to get outside, walk the children a little bit, get them out, you know. And then when the sirens go off, you go inside. People were dropping by regularly, our friends and other people. We were a young couple with 2 children, so we weren't doing so much of the social life. But other people, they would go out in the courtyards and drink and play chess and, you know, play cards, and a lot of different things going on, let's say it that way.
What was your feeling when you realized that it was basically your country who is bombing the city where you're living in?
It made me very angry. I wrote some articles about it. They got published in San Antonio, and they got published in, one of the articles I wrote got published in Rome and also in Germany, about how this is wrong. The American propaganda machine was working. It was very strong, talking about what awful people the Serbs were, and I was constantly fighting against that, because these people are like any other people. They have their hopes and their dreams. Most people don't hate anyone.
In one of the editorials that you wrote during the bombings, you characterize Serbs, and I'm reading now. These are broad-minded and loving, if stubborn people.
Yes.
They have criminals and they have saints.
True.
They are an invaluable part of the vast cultural heritage of Europe. and they deserve respect, support and encouragement as
Yes.
they struggle to become a vital part of thriving Europe.
Yeah.
Has this impression of Serbs somehow changed over the years?
No, I would say the same thing today.
Do you think Serbs somehow changed over the years, or Serbia in general as a country?
If you had asked me the question maybe 10 years ago, I probably would have said, yeah, they've changed in the sense that they're becoming more capitalistic, in the sense of they're becoming more focused on money and earning money and that sort of thing. But if you're asking me now, from my old age, because I'm getting on in my years, for 37 of those years that I was here, that I've been here, I've been in contact with a lot of young people. I've been teaching at the university, and that's been one of the greatest privileges of my life. The reason I think that they haven't changed is I've been working with them. I've been working with 23, 22, 3-year-olds, and their aspirations are the same as they were when I came here. They are looking to make a future for themselves. They're good people, they're smart people, they're hardworking, they're disciplined, many of them are enormously talented, open-minded, open-hearted, and the struggles that they're facing are very different from the ones that you faced and the ones that I faced, in that time. This is all like a new part of town, maybe 20 or 30,000 people now living just in this area.
Wow.
So it's growing very quickly. We usually have lots of flowers here growing, and sit out on the balcony and eat out here, and and even now I'm having my morning coffee
Here.
and sitting outside. That is against pigeons. It produces a wavelength that pigeons can't stand, so that I don't have an infestation of pigeons, which is a problem in all of these buildings.
In your email to me, you wrote that you would rather go to dentist than in Belgrade.
Yes.
What's wrong with Belgrade?
There are two things wrong with Belgrade. First thing is, I'm from Novi Sad. If you wake me up in the middle of the night and ask me, where are you from? I would say Novi Sad. Probably not even San Antonio, because I've lived here for so long. There's a rivalry between Novi Sad and Belgrade. People from here generally look down upon people who live in Belgrade, and people who live in Belgrade think of this as the provinces. So that's the first thing. Belgrade is wrong because it's just Belgrade. On the other hand, up until a few years ago, Novi Sad has been easy to get around. It's been a great place to raise your children because there weren't as many people here. The traffic wasn't as bad. Life here is slower. Novi Sad is not a metropolis by any stretch of the word. Let's say the early 2000s, it was the idea of going to Belgrade was no big deal. Other than the fact of getting there was like a problem. But when you see Belgrade now with all of the traffic and all the people and all this huge influx of people that have come in from the villages and from other countries that are living in Belgrade now, it's become quite an urban, if you ask me, it's an urban mess. The amount of pollution, the amount of crowds, I would rather go to the dentist than go to Belgrade. I'm from San Antonio and I drive in Houston. It's not that I'm afraid of urban centers. If I can avoid it, I do. There are other things as well, the piazza, the marketplace, because it's Vojvodina. And here you have the farmers bringing their fresh produce in. You can buy the stuff there. You don't even have to go to the store if you don't need to. Unless you want kisela voda or something like that.
Do you still go to piazza for produce?
Yes, sure, of course. It's one of my favorite activities. I've got my mushroom lady, and I've got my egg lady, and I've got my, my coffee lady, and I've got my,
Paradise lady.
Paradise lady, and there's also the krompir guy, the fruit stand, the place where I always buy, mandarins and that sort of stuff. And then we all, hey, šta ima, kako je, kako ste danas, it's great. Why didn't we move back to the States? One of the reasons, there's a lot of reasons for this, but I think one of the reasons is also that very idea of the comfort of living. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, is really a cool guy. He's one of my favorite people in the world. But I always felt very sorry for him because they live in Houston. And he always drove, an hour and a half. He would get up at 7 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning and drive for an hour and a half to get to work. And then work all day and then drive an hour and a half to get home. 3 hours a day in the car, commuting back and forth. I have never wanted to do that. That idea for me is foreign, and I think it's a huge waste of time. If you want to go anywhere in San Antonio and take the bus, it'll take you 2 hours, anywhere. You have to have a car. And so all of that whole way of living for me was always strange. I didn't want it. I was always spending time with my kids, walking around, going over to the Danube, walking along the Danube, going to a park, going to a play, taking them to do exercises or karate or guitar lessons or some stuff. We had time to raise our children. I didn't have to have nannies or, grandparents. They all helped us, of course, but we didn't have to have any of that, and we didn't need it, and we raised our kids. you know, and so it seemed to me a much more humane way of living. And not to mention, San Antonio doesn't even have a green market, the place where I'm from. So it's a more complicated way of thinking about it. You always get your groceries at a chain store of some sort.
What are your views about educational system in universities here?
It's changed a lot because they introduced the Bologna process in 2008 or 9, something like that. And I mean, I was part of that. I don't want to speak outside of my purview, outside of my wheelhouse. So I'm not working anymore, but we'll say that I am. If you allow me to choose 10 or 15 of my students from any year, send them to a competition with anyone in Europe, Germans, Dutch are really good. We're talking about English now. Swedes, Swiss, anybody. My students will be as good as, if not better than they are. Quality is high, especially for language learning. I think that you've noticed also that people here very often speak English. The last generation of students I had before I retired, I went to have coffee with 5 or 6 of them. They were speaking together, and it was some strange mixture of Serbian, English, internet speak, you know, some sort of Gen Z jargon. I had no idea what they were talking about. For 15 or 20 minutes, I was just sitting there looking at them, and they were laughing and telling stories, and I had no idea what they were talking about or which language they were speaking. It was crazy. But yeah, the people here have language skills. They speak more than one language because of their home situation. Their father's a Hungarian and their mom's a Serb and so on. Or they grew up with Cartoon Network. Many of my students, if I took them from here and put them in the middle of Austin, Texas, and let them go, people would ask them, are you from Wisconsin? You know, they would realize there's an accent, but they wouldn't know which one, but they wouldn't be able to identify that they're foreigners. Their English is really remarkable because Serbian is so complicated phonetically. You know, there's cosa and cosa, and it means 3 different completely. They hear these things. You and I don't hear them. You probably don't either. They hear their ears, because of their native tongue, they're very in tune with the way things sound. And very often then they really don't have accents. I do my translating there. This is one of my translations, Vladislav Bajec, Haman Balkania.
How long does it take to translate one book?
It depends on the book, maybe 6 months. 4 months to 6 months is like a good time.
You're working like every evening on translation?
Yeah, this is my first important translation that came out in the States.
Cyclist Conspiracy.
Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating book. It has a sequel. I'm going to give you this.
Thank you. Could you sign it?
Of course. This is a book of his short stories, some short fiction of his.
What is the main challenge in translating from Serbian to English?
In translation terms, it's called the closest natural equivalent. It has to be close to the original. It has to sound natural in the language that it's coming out in, and it needs to be equivalent. And then there are some cases where there is no equivalence. I mean, besides things like, you know, opanak, it's a leather slipper with a pointy toe on it. There's no word for that. How are you going to translate opanak into English? You can't. Promaya. A draft in English, the wind coming through the window, is not the same thing as promaya. The difference is that promaya in Serbian can kill you.
Promaya, it's the draft which kills you.
Yes, promaya ubija. You'll be in a bus, it'll be summertime, and the windows will all be closed. And if you open the window, the little old lady sitting in the seat there is going to tell you, Zatvori prozor ubija promaya. The idea that the moving wind is going to make you sick or kill you. Right, that's the idea.
Do you believe that promaya could kill?
No, I don't.
How would you translate bre?
I've tried to do it before and I can't. You can kind of do it with bro, but it's not. It's tough. A lot of the curse words, you have to be really careful with those. Jebote, for example, right? It can be happiness, hu jebote, you know, or Majebote, or so on. It depends on the intonation, the situation, and so on and so forth. The translation would change, I suppose, in Russian.
Once I had a comment under my video which says "Jeben komentar," and I don't know what does it mean. Is it a positive thing or is it a negative thing?
No, it's a negative thing.
Negative?
Yes.
Okay.
The only time I've ever gotten actually paid royalties was for this here. This is my only translation into Serbian. I did it with a colleague of mine named Tanya Milicev from the faculty. It's one of the 100 best novels that's ever come out in English. It's a great book, and we did it together into Serbian, and it came out really well. One of my favorite books is by a guy named Milisav Savic, Young Men from Rashka, and it's a really nice. It's a nice piece of literature.
I suppose your views on America has changed while you've been living in Serbia?
Not because of Serbia, but because I've just gotten older. It's that idea that work is not everything. And it seems to me that a lot of people in America, ever more so, it seems like more and more often, it's defining their lives. The Europeans have been resistant to that. That's the big difference, I guess. Life is not just about working. Life is about being someone and, being who you are. I've seen America turn more in that direction. I would rather not talk about the political differences. I mean, because the politics has also changed a lot in America in the meantime. But for me, all of that's like another question that we should probably leave aside, because it's all for me, it's all very stupid here and there and everywhere. So,
what do you feel when you travel to America?
I was there recently, and the fact is that I've realized that it really doesn't matter that much. It depends on who you are, you yourself. People here are the same as people there. And so in my interactions with people, it really doesn't matter if I'm here or there. Serbia has some really beautiful landscape. The mountains and the rivers and all of that is really gorgeous. One of the great things about the States is that those open skies with those mountains and the rivers and the wildlife and so on and so forth is great. That's maybe the biggest difference, is that feeling of openness, this feeling of space. I've always felt a little bit claustrophobic here. I live here, my neighbor's right there, I've got another neighbor over here. I run into them all the time, this sort of thing. In America, you have a different feeling about space. And I've always felt sort of claustrophobic here with people so close all the time. I hear them, whereas people mostly live in like separate houses in the States and they're more isolated because of that. Different question. But that feeling of space is much different. And especially being from Texas, where things are so big. It takes 18 hours to get from one end of Texas to the other, driving at 120 kilometers per hour, from Brownsville up to the Panhandle. Or it takes you 14 hours to get from El Paso to Orange, east-west. Just driving, without stop. It's very big, different landscapes, desert and hills and mountains and forests and coastline. You've got all of that there, so that's different. That's a very different feeling, that openness. So this is my mom, Carol. She was born in South Texas in a little bitty town. This is my dad. This is 1943, 44, when he entered the Marines. He fought in the South Seas. He died before I came here. She came before I came. She came to Yugoslavia to visit as like a tourist. When Yasmina and I got married, she came for the wedding.
What was her impressions of Serbia?
She liked it. She loved it.
So you have retired. What is your lifestyle now?
I feel completely free, if that makes any sense. I have no constraints. When I go on my road trip now, I'm going to go as far as I want to go. And when I get tired of going, I'll stop. I get up when I want to get up. I go when I want to go. Nobody can tell me what I need to do, where I need to go. It's a very liberating feeling. I mean, I have my own interests. These are different puzzles where you have to try to get this outside of the cage, for example, and get it back in.
How can you do it? Did you solve it?
I'm not going to show you. You have to do it yourself.
Okay.
You want all my secrets. So where you have different kinds of, Pictionary and Othello, all of these are strategy games.
Do you have Monopoly here?
No, I never. Monopoly is not a thing that I play with. Capitalism at its worst. All my instruments have names. This is Samantha. I have a little band that I play with. I have a singing partner and a bass player. And we don't play in public, but we get together and we sing songs together in the studio. It's not serious, it's more for us.
Oh yeah, it's more like a hobby.
Uh-huh.
I know that you organized blues festivals here.
Yes.
Do you still organize them?
I don't. Unfortunately, I haven't done that in a long time. I'm thinking about starting to do it again. A guy named Honey Boy Edwards, he was the oldest living blues guitarist. When we brought him to Serbia, he was 91 years old when we brought him here. The plane arrived and he didn't come out. We waited for like an hour. And when he did come out, there was a guy in a wheelchair. And we thought, oh my God, what have we done? But it was the airport, and so they brought him out in a wheelchair so he wouldn't fall down somewhere, and he couldn't sue them. And then he got up and said, God damn it, they stole my suitcase. They lost his suitcase somewhere. Oh, yeah. And the whole way back to Novi Sad, he said, he was a black man from Mississippi, not well educated. He was sitting in the backseat going, motherfucker, they stole my fucking suitcase. I ain't gonna play. You turn this car around, I'm canceling everything. I'm going back home. I don't want to be with these people. They stole my suitcase. I had a brand new pair of shoes in there, And the motherfucking cocksucker. I heard a string of curse words that I hadn't heard in a long time. Yeah, this guy.
How do you think Serbia shaped your personality?
All of this contact with people. I've had literally, 3,000 or 4,000 students pass through my fingers at some point. And I was standing there talking to them about something, and I suddenly realized, I don't know what's going on with that person right there. They're a student, and they're in my classroom, but I don't know what kind of suffering they're going through, what kind of joy they have in their life, what kind of happiness. I have no idea what's going on. Have they had a loss in their family? But it clicked on me at one point. I don't really have a right or a basis for thinking that I know what's best for anyone sitting here, or that I should be able to make a demand on them thinking that my way is the right way, because I don't know what they're going through. And I think it was maybe the moment that I woke up to the real idea of empathy, just understanding where someone is. Living here all of these years has taught me that. Be careful, be kind.
What challenges do you think Serbia faces now?
This really doesn't matter if you're in Italy, Germany, Japan, or Serbia. I think that we're all going through it right now. We're coming to a point of huge uncertainty for all of us. None of us know what's going to happen tomorrow, and especially with the political uncertainty that's going on, with this movement between means of government putting its hand on people and telling them what they need to do, whether that's here or in the States. It makes us feel very uncertain, and it makes us feel insecure. Two common reactions to this are either to withdraw into yourself like a turtle, like a snail, and try to protect yourself from it, or to expose yourself to whatever's coming out there and make the best out of it. And so that's kind of what Serbia needs to do as a country as well, right? If we stop and think about it, if we work together on these things, perhaps we can make a better place for all of us to live. And then it won't matter if you're here or there. When we learn to be kind to our neighbor here, then we learn to be kind to the neighbor living across the border. Then we learn to take away the border. Then they're real neighbors. But if you treat them just as a person or as another people who have the same wishes and desires and hopes that you and I have, then we can learn to be more human to each other, all of us. That's the challenge that Serbia faces. It's a challenge that America faces as well, is learning not to do that, not to make people the other, but rather we're people. We all belong to the same species.
What do you think, how we can overcome this challenge?
Reaching out to each other, being kind to one another, realizing that you have needs and that you need help, and then so does the person sitting across the table from you. That's how.